Everyone assumes Gen Z reads the most. They're wrong. Millennials are the biggest readers alive today. Not Gen Z, not boomers. Millennials. And that one fact is about to explain something scientists didn't expect: why a generation raised on paperbacks, then thrown into smartphones, is aging better than everyone predicted. For years, the story was simple. Millennials would be the burned-out generation. Too much internet, too much screen time, shrinking attention spans, declining mental health. Every headline predicted the same collapse. It didn't happen. Not to all of them. Because underneath the scrolling, a huge chunk of this generation quietly kept doing something the rest of the world stopped doing. Reading. Real books. Library cards. Folded corners. Stories that took weeks, not seconds. And decades later, researchers noticed something strange. These weren't just people who knew more trivia. Their brains were aging differently. Sharper. More resistant to decline than anyone expected. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What if the biggest brain hack of the last 50 years wasn't an app, a supplement, or a system, but something sitting quietly on a shelf the entire time? Let's call him Matt, born 1990, old enough to remember life before Wi-Fi, young enough to watch the internet swallow the world whole. Every page he turned as a kid was quietly rewiring his brain, years before anyone was worried about aging, memory, or Alzheimer's. His advantage started before he had any idea it mattered. Ask people which generation reads the most, and they'll say Gen Z, book talk, fantasy halls, color-coded shelves. It looks like Gen Z reinvented reading. They didn't. Millennials did the quiet, unglamorous version of it for 20 years first. That confuses people. How can the phone generation also be the book generation? Because millennials are the only generation that learned to read deeply on paper before pixels became impossible to escape. Matt remembers what reading felt like before notifications existed. No algorithm deciding what came next. No message interrupting chapter 4. Just one story, one imagination, nothing competing for it. Try that today. Almost impossible. That's exactly why neuroscientists got obsessed with deep reading. Not because books hold secret information, but because they demand something modern life almost never asks for anymore: complete, uninterrupted attention. Here's the number that made researchers sit up. People who read books for as little as 30 minutes a day had a 20% lower risk of dying during a long-term study, compared to non-readers. Not social media, not magazines. Books. And the number held up even after adjusting for income, education, and health. 30 minutes. Shorter than most people's morning scroll. How does reading affect how long someone lives? The answer has almost nothing to do with information, and everything to do with what happens while you're doing it. Picture Matt on his bedroom floor in 2002, a fantasy novel in his hands. Nothing around him moves. Inside his head, everything does. Castles appear. Rain falls over cities that don't exist. Characters lie, panic, hide secrets. None of it real. All of it built by his brain from scratch. Movies show you the world. Books make you construct it. Language, memory, attention, prediction, emotion. All firing together, every page. And every few paragraphs, his brain is quietly asking questions no one taught him to ask. Why did she say that? Can this person be trusted? What is he hiding? That's not just imagination. Psychologists call it social cognition, the skill of reading other people's hidden thoughts and motives. Simple stories with obvious heroes and villains don't build this. Novels that force you to sit in uncertainty do. That mental habit doesn't stay on the page. It follows you into arguments, friendships, first impressions. Matt thought he was escaping reality. He was training for it, and something else was happening at the same time. Not to his personality, but to his brain's actual architecture. Scientists have a name for it. It changes everything that comes next. You already understand retirement accounts. Invest a little now, benefit decades later. Your brain runs the same system. Neuroscientists call it cognitive reserve. Here's the part that stopped researchers cold. Two people can have nearly identical physical brain damage from Alzheimer's, and one of them keeps recognizing family, holding conversations, living independently for years longer than the other. The damage is the same. The outcome isn't. Their theory. Instead of relying on a single mental pathway, a well-read brain builds backup routes. Extra roads built long before traffic ever becomes a problem. One road closes, another one's already there. Books don't erase the disease. They make the brain harder to break. Matt never heard the phrase cognitive reserve as a kid. He was making deposits into it anyway, one paperback at a time. Here's what makes Matt's generation genuinely strange, scientifically speaking. They're the only group that lived through two completely different attention systems inside a single lifetime. At 11, waiting 3 weeks for the next book in a series felt normal. Now, a 3-second load time feels unbearable. That's not nostalgia talking. That's measurable change in how attention behaves. Every notification trains the brain the same lesson. Something else might matter more. Every vibration interrupts a thought mid-formation. Repeat that 10,000 times and deep focus gets harder to access for everyone. Which is exactly why a lot of millennials have quietly drifted back to physical books. Not nostalgia. Function. A page doesn't light up. It doesn't notify you. It just sits there, waiting. There's a physical reason too. Researchers keep hearing the same complaint from readers. After screens all day, paper doesn't fight for attention, it just receives it. Eye strain drops. Focus comes easier. Small difference. Not a small consequence. Because what you pay attention to is what becomes memory, what becomes learning, what eventually becomes you. One stat almost nobody mentions. Roughly 60% of millennials eventually bought a book they first borrowed from the library, nearly double the rate of baby boomers. Borrow. Read. Return. Then pay for something you already finished. Why? Because the library wasn't a discount bin. It was a testing ground. No algorithm, no purchase history, no recommendation engine. Just a random spine that caught someone's eye. That shelf at Matt's house isn't decoration. It's a timeline. The fantasy novels that built his imagination. The books he half understood at 20 and finally understood at 35. He's not collecting paper. He's collecting versions of himself, none of which vanish because a streaming license expired. But the real advantage didn't start in a library. It started years earlier, before Matt had any concept of aging at all. In a study, researchers didn't expect to be this conclusive. Matt jokes that he only read because he was bored. No phone, no YouTube, just a library card and whatever book was lying around. Researchers following more than 10,000 children found that kids who read for pleasure didn't just read better. They showed healthier brain development, stronger cognition, longer sleep, and lower rates of stress and depression by adolescence. That's strange if you think about it. A book can't teach your body how to sleep. It doesn't lecture you on stress management. So what's actually happening? Reading changes how the brain spends its time, reacting less, reflecting more, chasing stillness instead of stimulation, following one complete idea from start to finish instead of 50 fragments. No grades attached to any of it. No deadline. Just curiosity. Quietly one of the most effective learning systems the human brain has ever run on. Millennials grew up watching the third places disappear. Malls, local bookstores, church basements, community clubs, all the spots where people used to just bump into each other. At the exact same moment, social media promised total connection and somehow left people lonelier than before. Here's the twist researchers didn't expect. Reading strengthens the same social cognition that fights loneliness. Every novel drops you into someone else's mind, someone from another decade, another culture, a life you'll never live. For a few hundred pages, their world becomes yours, and your brain practices understanding a stranger. That skill doesn't stay in the book. It shows up in real conversations, real friendships, real empathy. Matt thought he was reading about people who didn't exist. He was training to understand the ones who do. Here's the biggest misunderstanding about reading. People think books fill your head with information. They do. But that's not the part that matters most. Information expires. Skills don't. Matt has forgotten most of the plots, most of the character names. Ask him to summarize a novel from 20 years ago, and he'll draw a blank. But his attention span didn't disappear. His patience didn't disappear. His ability to sit with a hard idea or understand someone unlike himself. None of that left. Because books don't just load your brain with facts. They rebuild the machine that acquires facts in the first place. That's a completely different kind of advantage, and it's why the research keeps landing in the same place, decade after decade. Matt never once thought, I'm protecting myself from cognitive decline. He just wanted to know what happened in the next chapter. Sometimes the biggest advantage in life isn't chasing the future. It's accidentally repeating the right habit for 30 years straight. Ask Matt today if reading changed his life, and he won't point to one book. He'll point to 1,000 quiet evenings. Library trips, dog-eared paperbacks, stories that outlasted the year he read them. He still has a phone. He still scrolls. He lives in the same digital world as everyone else. The difference is where his brain was built first. Before algorithms learned to hold attention, books had already taught his attention how to stay. Before feeds trained people to skim, stories trained him to think in full sentences, not fragments. Maybe that's the real reason so many millennial bookworms are aging differently. Not magic. not superior intelligence. Just thousands of quiet hours spent practicing something the modern world made nearly extinct: deep attention, patience, curiosity, empathy. The world spent decades looking for the secret to a healthier brain, in labs, in supplements, in apps. It was on the shelf the whole time, waiting for someone to turn the page.